sometimes.
Yeah, so people were super drugged up.
Yeah.
They were functional, but they were super drugged up, and so they were happy.
Yeah.
It's okay, no big deal. So
Yeah.
while they may have, in a sober state of mind, wanted out, in their state of mind when everybody showed up, there was a portion of them where the drugs were seriously doing their job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, a lot of people didn't dare confide to one another, too, because Jones encouraged them all to inform on each other.
Right, so you don't know who to trust.
Yeah, you remember those people? Well, hopefully I'm remembering this correctly, but the people who pre-positioned some stuff in the jungle for their escape.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and they finally had to go. They didn't tell their kids about it because they were afraid their kids would inform on them. And then they go get their kids and tell the kids, hey, we got to get out of here. We're leaving. Sorry, we didn't tell you before, but
But we're going now. So
we're going now, and because like, oh, thank God, I've been wanting to say something, but I was afraid you'd inform on me.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. But then Ryan shows up and he's saying, hey, anybody want to leave? And these guys decided to throw him with Ryan instead. A fateful decision.
It's probably looked like a life raft.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Turns out it had lots of holes in it.
yeah.
Bullet holes.
Oh.
Yeah. Back to what Mark Lane said to Gary, Charles Gary. If he's right, probably at least 150 people were murdered because if they were forced to drink cyanide against their will. So we're talking. The whole thing wasn't just a mass suicide; it was a mass murder also.
Yeah.
Huge deal. There's tons of detail about this, and if you want to read the FBI files, just send me an email, and I'll send you the link. And you
No,
can
I
read
think
too.
we'll probably post it.
And,
Well,
yeah.
we can't. Well, that's the hard part is that I don't think we can actually post the FBI files. Not because I don't want to.
We can post a link to them, but
Yeah,
be
we could
prepared
probably
for wading through a lot of stuff.
Yeah, be
Right.
prepared to search through hundreds of documents that are hundreds of pages thick.
In fairness, I kind of have the impression that our listeners would enjoy something like that.
Oh no! I'm just telling people that
Sure.
we'll send you the link, but be prepared in
Yeah.
documentation.
Oh, yeah,
I
it's a
spent
lot of
hours
stuff.
reading. I know Joe did days. It's
So I hate to cut this short, but the whole story of them leaving the temple and getting out to the airstrip where they were going to be picked up by 2 airplanes.
The 14 defectors, right?
Yeah, and plus the entourage.
for Ryan,
Yeah.
Congressman Ryan.
Yeah, the whole story is a fascinating, spellbinding tale in and of itself. What happened at the airstrip and everything, and what happened on the way out to the airstrip. But I'm going to summarize it really briefly. And I was reading that, and I read that story because they interviewed all the people that survived. And so I read that whole story again and again and again, but told from a different point of view, and it's very Rashomon-like. Every one of them was kind of different. Some of them were a lot different. And of course, they all did different things. Like one guy ran off into the jungle and hid and just watched in horrors what was happening. But anyway, back to our thing. The airstrip was 6 miles away from Jonestown. And they got all the way out there, and then they were dropped off by a truck from Jonestown, which turned and left. And their planes had not yet arrived, but then pretty soon the small one shows up. Then the larger one shows up. It's time to get on board. One of the guys that was there was a guy named Joe Wilson, who was head of security there. And he apparently he was not defecting. But another guy who was a plant, his name was Larry Layton, claimed that he did want to defect. He wanted to leave. Joe Wilson apparently gave Layton a gun. So Layton got aboard the small plane, and then he started shooting people. And at this time, a tractor shows up from Jonestown towing a trailer with a bunch of guys on it with guns. And so,
automatic rifles.
Yeah, some of them were. Not all of them were.
Not all
yeah,
of them, but they were automatic rifles.
Yeah, and they showed up with guns and started shooting the place up real good. Congressman Ryan was killed along with a bunch of other people.
Several of the journalists
were killed. A lot of people were wounded also. Some people escaped into the jungle. And
Wasn't there one person who hid like under a house?
That happened actually in
Later?
Jonestown.
That was in
That was in
Jonestown.
Jonestown.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
We'll talk about that.
I'm
in a
jumping
minute.
ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, that guy.
It's okay. There's so many. This is one of those things.
This is kind of just a spiral. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many individual stories. It's hard to keep them straight.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating story. But anyway, yeah, some people survived the Congress. That's why I said there was an assassination. I consider it to be an assassination of Congressman.
Congressman
I'd
Ryan,
agree.
yeah.
Yeah. So the whole thing was really tragic. The shooters all left and went back to Jonestown, where the infamous mass murder-suicide took place. It was really gruesome, especially the babies. They did the babies first. Yeah, and
Gave him poison.
a lot
this
of
is
this.
right for. I mean, I think we're kind of making the assumption that people do know what happened, and we've kind of alluded to it. But I think in no uncertain terms we can say, right, that the people that were members of this cult,
Yeah,
or whether willing or not,
yeah.
almost all of them drank a Kool-Aid cyanide mixture and died.
And died. And maybe, I think a few of them got shot.
I mean, I think that we were going to talk about this a little bit, but, it was poured down babies' throats.
Yeah.
People were held at gunpoint, told to drink this liquid if they refused. It's
There were people who had needle marks in them.
Yeah.
In places where it couldn't have been self-injected, like in the back and the shoulder blade.
Yeah.
And it's speculated that maybe
They
the
were
needle
held
marks
down.
were held down, or the needle marks were from them giving them more of something because they were having such an adverse reaction.
Yeah.
So it's not a smooth, peaceful transition. It's a giant seizure. So let's just get them out and do them in
well,
fast.
yeah. I don't think cyanide is a super pleasant way.
No,
I don't think so at all.
Yeah.
Well, but it wasn't a straight cyanide concoction. There was
Right.
other stuff in
Well,
it.
that
but-
makes it even worse a little bit,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Could
But
be.
so I just wanted to say, I think we're kind of making the assumption that everybody knows, but I think it's unsafe to make that assumption.
no, you're
so
right, you are right,
I'll
you are
be the horrible person and just say that's what happened.
Yeah, and a
This
lot
is
of...
the murder-suicide that we're talking about.
Yeah, and so over 900 people died. Part of the description of what happened there is thanks to a guy named Odell Rhodes. And Odell
He's the
Rhodes,
one who hid under the
he
building.
is the one who snuck off. Smart guy, and hid under a building and witnessed a lot of this stuff. And it must have been really fun to watch.
Oh,
God.
I'm sure he felt glad to be where he was and not out there drinking the Kool-Aid.
I still can't imagine, though.
Oh, yeah.
I would have been found because of the sounds of me herking my guts.
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
know, just herking, but also just like crying.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, some of the other, like one of the accounts of one of the guys who escaped when they started shooting up the airplanes at the airstrip. He ran off to the jungle about 50 yards away, and from the brush, he looked back to see what was going on. And the guys with the rifles were blowing people's brains out at point blank range, finishing off the wounded.
Well,
that had to be pretty horrifying to watch too.
If you want to hear anything disturbing, we've talked about the White Knight tapes. So those were preparation for something going wrong. And the shooting of Congressman Ryan, that's something going wrong. That last tape of Jim Jones is available on the internet.
Yeah.
And if you want to listen, and it's 45 minutes long. If you want to listen to something it's kind of creepy and kind of disturbing, but kind of gives you a pretty good perspective of what they were thinking, listen to that thing.
Yeah.
I skimmed through bits and pieces of it. It's really, to me, hard to listen to, but it'll give you an idea of their frame of mind.
Yeah. Just guano crazy, but anyway.
Yeah.
We
No,
gotta make a
just-
shirt that says that.
Yeah.
Just a slight aside. The two attorneys, Mark Lane and Charles Gary, after Leo Ryan left with all the defectors, Jones was obviously, he pretended at the time, he said goodbye, shook their hands, gave them back their passports, he pretended to be okay with it, but he was actually, of course, not okay with it.
Furious, I believe.
Yeah, and he said to the two attorneys, he says, you guys, I want you to go to the East Guest House. That's like on the east side of the compound, which is the house that Jones originally lived in at first until his final quarters were built. Says, you guys need to go to the East-West House. Everybody is really mad. And the attorneys are going, well, what are you talking about? People don't look all that mad to me, to us. And says, they're really mad. They're really mad. You just better go there. And so they're like, okay. They took their bags and they headed off to the east side of Jonestown. It's on the edge of Jonestown. And when sat in there for a while, pondering what to do. And then they look out the window and they see a couple of guys, security guys, coming out into the hut next door to their house. And they came back out with a couple of rifles. And then they came over to their house, and actually they weren't threatening; they were friendly, but they were talking about how they're going to commit revolutionary suicide and all this stuff, and it's a blow for the workers' cause and yada yada. And the lawyers are like, okay, that's cool. You might want to think about something a little less drastic, maybe. And after they left, these guys left and headed off to the pavilion, which is where everybody was gathering for the big show. The attorneys looked at each other and said, "We should get out of here, huh?" And they said, "Yeah." And they snuck away and went into the jungle, and they spent the night in the jungle hiding. They heard some gunshots and things like that, but yeah, they survived. Smart move. I definitely would have booked.
Yeah.
Back to the Mills. After word of what happened at Jonestown got back to the U.S., the Mills family and a lot of other concerned relatives and defectors, etc., were put under police protection. Because, of course, as I said, not every temple member died, and the ones who survived, a lot of them were the worst of the worst. Or, excuse me, the worst of the worst, not the worst of the worst.
Yeah. Grammar Nazi.
Yeah. The ones who didn't take the poison were, I think, for the most part, the ones who forced everybody else to.
And obviously, they weren't as committed to the church.
Apparently not. And they might have rationalized it to themselves. Well, the Reverend Jones really wanted me to off myself, but, I'm going to tell myself that I'm going to stay alive to get revenge on all those nasty defectors that caused all this to happen.
Right, because did Jones die?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He drank the Kool-Aid, too.
No.
He blew his brains out.
He shot himself.
Oh, he shot himself.
Smart
But he
guy.
died at the same time, right?
Yes, he died with
Right.
everyone else.
So...
I think his wife drank the Kool-Aid, and in the end, he ended up taking his own life with a gun.
Yeah. I went through the FBI files on Jonestown, anyway, and found the FBI's list of the most fanatical supporters of Jim Jones. Well, this was compiled from the testimony of the survivors that they interviewed. I also went through the files to try to find out who lived and where they wound up. And some of them actually lived and wound up back in the U.S. Yeah, starting with Terry Buford. She was, I think, probably one of the top people in his organization. And she, one interviewee said that she is the most dangerous person alive. Many others agreed with that.
So she was one of the elite gun carrying.
One of the elite, and apparently mean, sadistic, dangerous.
I don't know.
And she's back in the U.S. Dude.
Well, so just as an interesting little point, right, that in this time it was a lot of mixed races that were part of Jonestown, and also the fact that there were a lot of women in high positions. That's odd for anything of this time. So I'll just go ahead and point that out. So at the very least, Jim Jones was equal.
He was
progressive that way.
He was very progressive that way.
In terms of race, yeah, he wasn't a raging egalitarian when you consider the way he ran his organization.
But where did he start out again?
Where did he start?
Where did the
Indiana,
church?
right?
Where did the temple start out?
Oh, it started out in Indiana.
No, I'm trying to remember. Is that I remember the fact that he didn't care about race because I know that he lived in an area that was a mixed population, which at that time was probably considered a slum, and that's one of the things that I know he kind of espoused about when they got to San Francisco.
Well,
is
it's
to
not
make
caring
sure to
about
integrate.
race or gender, because those were both really big issues at that time. Anyway,
Yeah, well,
sorry.
plus he had a lot of women high in his organization because he was having sex with them,
Well,
too.
fair,
There's
but
that.
for them all to be, I don't know, equality, man.
Yeah, equality.
I don't know.
Yeah. So who else on our list from the FBI? Stephen Jones was Jim Jones's son, who was considered even more dangerous than Jones. But luckily, he was captured by the Guyanese, and I believe he spent some time in prison down there.
Oh, they even recognized.
Yeah. Larry Layton, the shooter at the airstrip, he survived, but he was arrested, put on trial, and imprisoned. He was in prison in Guyana until 2002. So not a threat to the Mills. Some other ones, there's a guy named Tim Jones. Again, these are all the dangerous people.
Don't know where he's at.
His whereabouts unknown. Sandy Bradshaw, also considered dangerous. Whereabouts unknown. Eugene Smith. Carl Barnett.
There's over a dozen people on this list.
There's a lot of people, and there are several of them. Jimmy Jones Jr. and John Cobb were in the U.S. They were identified as being in the U.S. So, I mean, and also, this is not even count. None of these guys were the guys that were on the trailer being pulled behind the tractor that slaughtered all those people at the airstrip.
Oh.
You got to consider those guys dangerous, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, the point I'm making here is that there were some dangerous people still on the loose in the U.S.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and so they had reason to be a little bit fearful for their lives.
So I guess this brings us back to the initial question,
Who killed them?
who killed the Millers? Because
The Mills.
The Mills. I got to be honest with you. I a little bit forgot that that's what we were talking about.
Well, we talked about them for 15 minutes, and now for the next 40 minutes, we've talked about Jonestown. How did you forget about the Mills?
I don't know.
I know.
But it's very important background.
It is the backstory to this whole thing.
I tried. I admit, I tried to research this without getting into Jonestown
No
because
way.
I didn't
There's no
want
way.
to go down to that
There's
rabbit
literally
hole.
no way.
You can't do it.
It was impossible.
Yeah, no.
Anybody who was a part of that church, group, cult, whatever, their story is tied up in it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
just tied up.
even the Mills, the Mills, even though they never went to Jonestown at all, they still out of there.
Yeah.
By the way, this is an aside. There's a really great book about Jonestown called Journey to Nowhere by Shiva Naipaul, and it was published in the UK under the title Black and White. But it's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. Shiva Naipaul was brother of V.S. Naipaul, who I'm sure you've heard of.
No.
No, literary giant and all that. And Shiva was also quite a literary giant, but he died, unfortunately, at the age of 40 of a heart attack, which is kind of tragic for the world because he was a great writer. But I recommend that book highly. Now, that's that aside, I guess we got to figure out who killed the Mills family.
Yeah.
All right, let's lead off with theories. You guys have any theories you like?
No.
Okay.
I
No.
mean, no.
No? Okay. Okay, one theory is that Eddie did it. This is, of course, what the Berkeley PD seems to think. They revived this later on in the early aughts. A cold case detective from Berkeley dove back into it, I guess, reanalyzed the evidence and contacted the family and asked them for any possible supporting evidence that they could supply. The family was basically like, we don't think Eddie did it. We can't think of any evidence, that's relevant that we're going to give you. So that was that. And yet this guy, the detective, still pursued his case against Eddie and managed to get Eddie rearrested again. And
That was in 2005, right?
Yeah.
Was he like out of the country or?
Yeah, he was living in Japan. He actually got married, had a couple of kids, and was living in Japan. And he came back for the holidays. So this was in early December 2005.
Okay.
And they arrested him at the airport. But I gotta say, I haven't seen their evidence. I assume they've got more than just the gunshot residue. Because if that's all they've got, then dudes.
Well, that's the hard part, is that it's technically a cold case, so they're not going to release what they have.
Yeah, exactly.
So we can guess at what they have, but all we know about for sure is the gunshot residue.
Well, but the other frustrating thing is that they reopened the case, and usually that's because new evidence has come to light, right?
Yeah.
That's why they reopen cases. But it didn't seem like anything new had come up.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they might, there have been changes, and it might be that they still had evidence in the evidence room, like clothing and tissue samples and all kinds of stuff like that. And so maybe using DNA, they were able to
try to figure something out.
Well,
So he was arrested, but weren't there no charges brought against him because the district attorney was like, no, seriously, there's not enough evidence for this.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean.
And so the big game changer you would think would be like DNA evidence, but the problem with that is Eddie lived in the same damn house as them, right?
Yeah.
He was their family.
It's like, hey, Eddie, we found your DNA at the murder scene. Well,
We found your fingerprints all over that house.
Well, yeah, weird.
I know. So I have no idea what fresh evidence this guy's got.
Yeah.
As far as the gunshot residue, I did a little research on gunshot residue, and I had no idea how unreliable that stuff is.
Oh, it's incredibly unreliable.
Yeah.
It's bad.
Crazy.
Yeah.
It is not what the television show CSI tells you it is.
No, it's
No.
not.
You have gunshot residue on your hands, sir. You're guilty.
No.
Yeah.
It's not the case.
Yeah, and according to the one thing that I read, people can pick it up from police officers.
You can pick it up from like shaking someone's hand.
Yeah,
can't
you
you?
pick it up. Yeah, you can pick it
Yeah.
up from the police car. Because there's going to be gunshot residue in police stations
And
and
there's-
stuff. And a
yeah.
lot of labs are themselves contaminated with that stuff.
Wouldn't you also
So-
think maybe like if you put handcuffs that you've got your gun next to, that you've got your hands next to, that all of that stuff, you
Yeah.
put it on someone's hands
Yeah.
or
So,
breasts? I mean,
Gunshot residue isn't a permanent thing. It lasts, I think it's 4 to 6 hours.
Sure, but-
on a surface before it gets rubbed off and eventually diluted and disappeared. So having it on the cuffs per se, I wouldn't say, but the hands of the cops, if they're holding their gun or they've shot their gun and put it back in the holster. But that also makes me think, okay, well, if it's 4 to 6 hours and Eddie's got it in his right hand, and he wasn't home that afternoon, and he went and saw some friends who happened to be shooting a gun, and he greets them. What is a typical male greeting? It's to shake hands.
There's that. Yeah.
Which transfers it to him, because that's how easy it is to transfer this stuff.
Well, and also there's other things that can give you a false positive on that test. Like if you're like a brake mechanic, I was told, you can actually, even though you've not shot a gun at all, you'll test positive.
I bet there's
brake dust.
Yeah.
I bet there's some, stuff that you could pick up by smoking a lot of marijuana.
Possibly,
Like if you
yeah.
had a certain kind of lighter, for instance,